Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you. Today we have another French philosopher that we are going to be talking about. His name is Gabriel Marcel. Yeah, who was Gabriel Marcel? Well, he was a French philosopher, playwright, and a music critic. He is a very multifaceted, as we say, intellectual, and whose contribution was in Christian existentialism, and this really set him apart with the broader philosophical landscape at the time. And we're going to be looking at the predominant societal narrative that was surrounding his period, especially in France. And while his work was influenced by existentialist thinkers like Kierkegaard and Heidegger, Marcel's primary focus diverged from all these different previous approaches. He was emphasizing despair and absurdity. Kind of sounds to me like Camus, for example. And he sought to illuminate the spiritual and relational dimensions of human existence, of this human. I think existence in a lot of ways is central to all our philosophical dialogue, right? It's always about whether our existence has a mind and a body, for example, whether it is primarily for others or for ourselves, whether it is true, whether it is absurd, whether it is moral, whether it is religious, all these different ideas stemming from humanity itself. And yeah, his work also dealt with this. He had a emphasis in the contrast between being and having, as well as the profound importance of faith, love, hope, and search for meaning, and all these personal connections that shape the human condition. And so let's look more closely into the time in which he worked. The historical context is very nuanced here. He was working in a time of a tumultuous period between the two world wars. So we see that he was working mainly in the 1910s, 20s, 30s, around there. And the profound crisis of his era, I think, promoted him to contemplate human existence and human suffering, the why we must exist, why we must suffer, the fundamental questions behind why human beings live, how we navigate life, and all of these different ideas as there is an increasing domination of brutality and also materialism and alienation with each other. And against this historical background, Marcel's existentialism, as we have seen previously, emerged as a response to modernity's tendency to dehumanize an individual and reducing human beings to mere objects of economic or political systems, a classification in a sense. And living through these devastations, I think, profoundly impacted his way in understanding how war just strips individuals of their humanities, and how in wars humanity becomes an instrument of a grand ideological conflict. And so this kind of reduction of ourselves, a effacing of the self, I think fundamentally changed him to emphasize the importance of personal dignity and ethical responsibility, and even a kind of spiritual, a divine reflection when countenancing all the alienation of contemporary life. And unlike his atheist existentialist contemporaries, Marcel saw hope in faith and communion rather than in radical autonomy or even nihilism that prevailed his time. Yeah, so let's jump right into one of his most famous books. One of his seminal works, I would say, is The Mystery of Being, written in 1951, that delves into the fundamental nature of existence, and it tries to distinguish between two different modes of engagement with the world. So there is a intellectual, a scientific way of engagement, and a lived, experienced mode. And I think this distinction is seen in a lot of different philosophers that we have looked at in the past. Marcel argued that while rational analysis is a very powerful tool, it is necessary for understanding the material world, it is ultimately not enough. It is insufficient for grasping the deeper existential questions that define human life. And for Marcel, existence itself is not something that can be neatly categorized or explained through purely intellectual means. Instead, he describes being as a mystery, right? Something that must be encountered, that cannot be fully simply reduced down into abstract and intellectual analysis, but something that must be experienced in relationships, in acts of love, in moments of self-transcendence. And he contrasts this with modern tendencies to reduce existence to quantifiable data and treating individuals as units that are simply interchangeable, right, within an interpersonal system. And this perspective, I think, aligns closely with his critique of materialism itself. According to Marcel, modern society often prioritizes having, this having of possessions, accumulations of wealth and power, and all these realistic, materialistic, and tangible things over being, which is fully enjoying the identity that you have, having authentic relationships and having spiritual depth in your life that helps to foster relationships and fulfill in a meaningful way with the world and something close to divinity. And the danger of having so much having and not being is that it fosters alienation, leading individuals to see only themselves and their intrinsic worth without the intrinsic worth and value of other people. When we want to have inherent values, we must have an understanding of other people's values. And I think in the same way, he explores having distinctions and all these different ideas over and over again in some of his other writings. Here is one of his most famous quotes: "To be is to be for someone, not to have something." Again, this idea of not having material possessions and using all these external markers of success to understand oneself, but using relationships with others, embracing the vulnerability that is being, and being able to, through relationship, ethical commitments, and most importantly to him, spiritual journeys through which one can fundamentally expand oneself and cultivate a deep, meaningful relationship with life. Yeah, and so through his work, he influenced so many different later thinkers, especially phenomenological, and his Christian existentialism influenced both religious circles, especially those who believed in existentialism, and also secular circles, because he was working with atheist existentialists at the time. And as we will talk about a bit more shortly afterwards, his work just had a lasting impact on theology, on science, on neurology, all these different fields of thought, and it primarily emphasizes the philosophy of ethics and of life for human beings. Similarly, as we have seen, we also have a book titled Being and Having, again exploring this distinction between these two words. And I think he even tries to take in some very modern ideas in order to talk about consumerism in a way. So it's how modern consumers often, I think, encourage a culture so that they define themselves by what they own rather than what they are. Having this obsession over material possessions to Marcel was just completely preposterous, and he contends that this focus on accumulation breeds a sense of emptiness, a dissatisfaction, like all material possessions do, right? If you go to the mall and you see a box of cookies and you buy it, you're like, oh, I have this cookie. But eventually you're gonna eat the cookie, it's gonna rot, you're gonna lose it, and one day it will not be there to fulfill the deeper need that your human soul needs. You as humanity want something bigger than material possessions. And so Marcel argues that when people become preoccupied with what they want, they risk losing touch of their deeper identity. And so Marcel suggests that instead, a person's true essence is found not in external things, not in modern consumerism, not in acquisitions, external achievements, but in love, in relationships, again, ethical commitments, and all these insights are so relevant in an age right now when consumerism, especially in social media, just has immense influence, where you have to have the latest Louis Vuitton and Gucci, right? This whole trend that shapes individual desires and even self-understanding and perception in a way that leads to isolation if one does not own all the things that other people owns. And very famously, he said, "A man is never so weak as when he is in the state of having." This phrase, I think, perfectly captures that possessions and external markers are really just a false sense of security. They leave individuals vulnerable, and by contrast, having a true fulfilled strength in being is being able to engage on authentically and deeply, making meaningful connections with others. And yeah, for Marcel, I think his contributions to philosophy extend beyond existentialism. His work has had a lasting impact on theology, ethics, a philosophical approach that emphasizes human dignity, also called personalism. His critiques of materialism and consumer culture, I think, are truly relevant in today's society, would wring a lot of hearts, I would believe, especially with the effects of modern day technology, of all this capitalism, all these social fragmentation that really can be harsh on a human soul. And so his influence can be seen in works such as Charles Taylor's book later, who tried to use his idea of human dignity and spirituality in a more modern context in order to talk more about community, humanity, a meaningful relationship with others, and a relational aspect of being. And also Emmanuel Monnier, who is a key figure who developed this idea of the primacy of human dignity, who was deeply influenced by Marcel's emphasis on human dignity and relationality rather than strict intellectual understandings and calculative manipulative understandings. And yeah, I think for Marcel, existential was inherently relational. He just said, human beings cannot be understood and lived in isolation. They must be in relationships with other people. And I think we see this in Plato even, that I believe, give me a second, Plato, man, beast, God, live alone. Whoever is delighted in solitude is either a wild beast or a god. Yeah, these same kind of ideas that individuals must transcend their individual egos, because we're not gods and we're not wild beasts, and we must connect to something greater than ourselves, because just being contained within ourselves is very, very, very selfish in a way. And this idea, I think, is a very stark contrast with some other figures that we have looked at who saw human relationship as a struggle, sort of, for power and control. Even writers like Nietzsche, right? Marcel, on the other hand, viewed love as an essential expression, and it's really, it may sound corny, but really it's love that is not merely an emotion, but an active kind of commitment to other people's well-being, to loving them, a way of affirming the inherent dignity and worth that is within each other. Yeah, so Gabriel Marcel's philosophy offers a profound and I think very, very thought-provoking explanation of what it means to be human in an increasingly impersonal world. I really loved that sentence. I thought about that a lot as I wrote it, and I think our society is truly becoming very impersonal. Impersonal is the perfect way to capture it. We're, by having more than being, we're really losing on a lot of the love and personal relationships that we need in modern existence. And I think Marcel just reminds us that fulfillment lies in not what we possess, but in how we engage with the world and with the people around us. And he, I think, really challenges us to consider our priorities, urging us to cultivate a deeper and more authentic way of being. one that embraces mystery, faith, and the profound interconnectedness of human life. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that this gave you a spark of thought into who Gabriel Marcel was, into his philosophy, and that you as modern listeners, just like I, a modern student, were able to resonate with his philosophy and that you're more curious to learn about him. Thank you so much for watching, and stay curious. Bye-bye.